So subsequently, Jacob took all his family, all of his sons, his daughters, their wives, and all of his livestock and all of his servants to Egypt. We ought to thank God for the midwives, Sipporah and Puah, who saved the boys because they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. And this allowed Moses to be born and to grow up in Pharaoh's house, flee to Midian after he killed a Hebrew. He met Jethro, or otherwise called Ruel, married Zipporah, and that king of Egypt died, and thus the story continues. Moses had experienced, prior to our verses today, he experienced meeting God at the burning bush. But when he was in the plain tending the flocks, he looked up and saw something burning and said, what is that? Let me go inquire. And he gets up on the mountainside and he hears a voice and it says, stop. Put off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground. But what he was given was a message that you shall go to Egypt to set my people free. Just like God looked upon the Israelites in that day, God is looking upon us today. In fact, God is looking on us every day and is concerned about us, concerned about our lives individually and corporately. God is concerned about our well-being, our finances, our health, our everything. So as we continue in this season of revival, let's recap for a moment. Reviving is to impart new life and vigor to cause or regain consciousness, to give new life or energy, to be brought back to life, consciousness or strength, to restore, re-energize, rejuvenate, reinvigorate, and sometimes resuscitate. Our sermon topic for today is reviving our confidence in God. And today we read and heard God say 4 things to Moses for the children of Israel, and those 4 things are for us as well. I have indeed seen the misery. I have heard them crying out. I am concerned about their suffering. I have come down to rescue them. I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. God says he has seen. This is past tense, which means that God first had to look upon them and know what they were going through, know their everyday situations and circumstances, in order for God to proclaim, I have seen. Seen by definition means to perceive by sight or have the power to perceive, to have checked out the situation, to have considered the situation or circumstance, to have a picture of what's going on, or to know the happenings. For God to have seen the Israelites in their misery, like he sees us in our misery, theirs in our state of ill-being due to affliction or misfortune, or feelings of intense unhappiness, God said he had to do something. Matter of fact, God is doing something and is always doing something, whether it is seen or unseen. The psalmist states this about us as just individuals and human beings. What is humankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you cared for them. You've made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hand. You put everything under their feet. We can garner from our biblical story and the story of our lives that we will have some, and we do have some, misery going on in our lives. There's an American colloquialism that misery loves company. And so most times when we are miserable, we invite other people to be miserable with us. Because we're all going through something most days, if not every day. But God does see us, and God is concerned for us. We can thank God that he sees us, and we can exclaim like Hagar did when she was in the desert of her life, about to die with her son Ishmael because of the lack of water. Then all of a sudden an oasis appears. It's not a mirage, but an actual oasis where she and her son can go and drink of some water to make the journey. She exclaimed, El Olam, the God who sees me. Can you shout with Hagar, El Olam, in your times of misery? That God sees you and is concerned about you and will provide your needs? God sees us and meets us at our point of need. God said in this text, I have seen. So revive your confidence in God. Next we have God saying, I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. In order for God to proclaim he has heard us, he had to first do what? Hear us. And what preceded God's hearing was for us to cry out in prayer to God. To have heard means detected or perceived by the sense of hearing. Or hear means to perceive sound through the auditory senses. To get to know, to become aware of. Receive a communication from someone. Listen and pay attention. And in this case, he empathized with them. Now we know their slave drivers were physical people with physical whips, whipping on their physical backs, making them make brick and mortar to build things, and sometimes not even providing the straw so they can build. So they had to make mud bricks. Our slave drivers are those situations and circumstances that captivate our minds, our bodies, and our spirit. Those situations that oppress us, that harms us, that cause us to grieve and mourn, that beats us down day after day, and sometimes drive us beyond the point of despair. God does hear us when we cry out in prayer and in communication to him. How do you know? I'm glad you asked me. God does respond to our prayers and our questions, but I believe sometimes we do not like the answer that we receive. I consulted a small book that I like to read over periods of time called Wrestling with God by Greg Lowry. And of course, it comes from the scripture of Jacob wrestling with the angel and telling the angel of the Lord, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. We are to always cry out in prayer to God, and the biblical text informs and reminds us in everything by prayer and supplication, let our requests be made known unto God. To pray without ceasing or giving up. To pray always with prayer and supplication in the Spirit. This author Lowry states that when it seems like the answers don't come, they are really answered. He or God does not always say yes, but sometimes it is a no or a wait. Some things may come too soon for us, or may be too much for us, or we're really not ready to handle them. He further says, when God answers, we say, God did not answer my prayer. But what we're really saying is, I don't like what God said. Lowry purports another way of looking at the yes, no, or wait that God may give us. He may say yes or go,